Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms, your class is a big part of your identity. In fact, class identity is one of the stated tenets of the game's design philosophy. Pantheon will feature 12 classes, with 2 more tentatively scheduled for post-launch. When we think of class identity, we tend to think of class skills, group utility, and what makes the class different from the others. These have been some of the most common discussions in the Pantheon community. What isn't often considered is how the class fits into the lore of the world. For example, what role did a certain class play in the Deicide War? Or, who are the notable figures of a particular class in the story of Terminus? Class identity from a lore standpoint hasn't gotten as much attention, but maybe you want to roleplay your character, or you're just looking for another layer of class identity, then this may be something you want to take into account when you're deciding which class you'll play in Pantheon. So in this video series, let's take a look at each class, and highlight what the lore says about them. We'll scour all the released lore pieces to date, look at class descriptions and skills, and try to find a few hidden gems to see what the lore says about your favorite class. As I alluded to, this will be a series of 4 videos, in which we'll look at 3 of the 12 launch classes in each video. So make sure you're subscribed and you have the notifications turned on so you don't miss your favorite class. In part 1, we'll cover the Monk, Wizard, and Enchanter. So let's start a deep dive into the lore of the classes. We start with the Monk class. Now, the class page offers very little in terms of the class's connection to the lore. It states, the way of the monk is the path of harmony between the body and the soul, but even that is vague at best. Where we discover more is in the tale of Bel Iris, the signature character detailed in the July 2019 newsletter. In it, we learn of the Adahane, a monastic order originating on the Archai homeworld of Roa. They are a group of celibate servant monks. The Adahane were trained as defenders of the 3 religious sects of the Archai's Eru, Ne, Mar Pantheon, as well as bodyguards for diplomatic envoys and the like. But when the Archai arrived on Terminus, the leaders of the diverse priestly order convened and chose to turn over authority of their people to the very ones who had served them for so long. The Adahane would rule their new home of Suroa as one undivided house. So the monk class holds a position of authority in Suroa, and life amongst the Archai is governed by their decisions. Now that we know the Archai were at one time a race centered upon life as a monk, we can extrapolate the class's role much further. In the timeline of Terminus, the monks of Adahane were active in the events which shaped the world. Recall that the Archai's deity, the dead Eris, Haethys Krevjil, was seduced into dissension by the ravaging lord. The Archai of the Adahane, along with the dwarves, waged a choreographed campaign of elusiveness in shrewd tandem, denying the dead Eris an open field to fit with her numerical advantage. Yet their efforts were not enough. Hero of the Archai, and possibly a monk of the highest order of the Adahane, Rel Siren of the Archai was slain after sealing himself outside the door of the frozen sanctum. But when the war was over and the ravaging lord ultimately defeated, the elven, human, dwarven, and Archai stood as they always had, at the summit of Vesu. Lastly, it's noted after the near defeat in the Deicide War, the Adahane considered several blind spots in their preparedness. Among the reforms that followed, it was decided that using the arcane as an offensive weapon in times of war would be a useful counterpart to their defensive tradition. Could it also be that witnessing the treason of their deity caused the Adahane to shift away from a monk-centric way of life? Bel Iris, the signature character we learned of, ushered in wizardry to the Adahane. It's noted she grew the nursery of Archai wizards into a garden of generational strength, even more than her predecessors. So speaking of wizards, that brings us to our next class. The wizards of Terminus have had extensive involvement in the ebb and flow of power and influence. Most central to this were the war wizards. Lore tells us the 6 sons of Terminus were warriors of godlike power and physical might and arcane discipline, one from each pantheon of the sacred. More commonly called war wizards, they are most easily described as high mortal beings of nearly pure supernatural ability. Their role in the Deicide War was immense, facing the ravaging lord and ultimately bringing about an end to the conflict. While the war wizards were obviously more than just simple wizards, as will be common amongst Terminus' residents, it would be remiss to think that those embody this class would bear no connection to the legendary figures. Remember, there are none that exist who have so obsessively studied the enigmatic and destructive nature of the arcane. In contrast to the saviors that were the war wizards, there are also the earth mages of Majin Ki, who allied with the ravaging lord during the Deicide War. It was at the behest of the dead heiress that the Magi create columns of infernal black flame to burn constantly, slowly encroaching upon the refuge from each side of the Tenebris. Looking at the class skills, we learn of an ancient order of wizards. An epic skill available to the wizards is the Order of the Gatewalkers. The description notes this order has maintained a steady watch over the gateways for ages, guarding their secrets and protecting them from destruction. We also see reference to unidentified wizards of some renown in the naming of several spells available to the class. Firstly, there is Crew Venoth, an apparent master of fire magic whose spells conjure the flames iconic to the wizard class. Another master of the class and practitioner of the cold school of magic was Veyrul. His blade was clearly a powerful tool in the wizard's arsenal. As well, the lore provides a mystery for those considering playing a wizard. The schools of fire, cold, and arcane are known, but there is rumored to be a fourth school of magic, discovered by certain recondite wizards, devastating in effect and untethered to the elemental constraints. Lastly, a wizard of note appears in the short story The One Between the Winds Part 2. In that tale we learn of the Ashen Elf Savin, who was also something of a wizard, though he considered that reputation of secondary importance. One wonders what class Savin would have considered his primary one. As an Ashen Elf, with his noted discernment skills, perhaps he was an Enchanter. Let's take a closer look at that class. While not depicted as explicitly as the wizards of history, there's little doubt that enchanters have had a heavy role in influencing Terminus's balance of power. As noted with Savin, their realm is the mind of their opponents. We are told, like the current of a raging river is the pull of an enchanter on the mind of their adversaries. Through a single word, the enchanter can turn the intent of an enemy and break even the strongest of wills into submission. Whether through trickery or coercion, the enchanter is adept at controlling the battlefield and forming order out of chaos. Let's return to the tale of Savin, and note he often served as envoy on matters of state for the Anadem Council. His habits of study and skills of memory garnered him a reputation in the courts beyond Fairthale, and his ability to discern the truth in a moment put even his friends on edge. Recall that his reputation as a wizard was of secondary importance. The skills of an enchanter would certainly be a primary consideration in matters of diplomacy and negotiation. Speaking of skills, if we look at the Enchanter's class page, we see a plethora of spells named after those who have earned esteem in the class. There was Lirith, an apparent master of currying favor with both merchants and those of opposing factions. And Enshire, a favorite of other spellcasters for his or her ability to replenish their mana. If you needed to disguise yourself or your group, Squee was the enchanter who you sought. Aemai had a particular talent for lessening the potency of weapons, while Gavin's brilliant displays were stunning to say the least. But none were as powerful as the enchanter Malison, who could enter the minds of both friend and foe to both empower and destroy from within. A truly terrifying prospect, the power of an enchanter should never be underestimated. With that in mind, consider what the lore tells us about the Union of Shadow. This group worked in concert with the Ravaging Lord during the Deicide War, yet their weapons were of mind rather than body. The lore states, in some manner, they have held power over dignities, warlords, and high priests and mortals. By what force they wield this control is gravely unknown. Before any effort against them physically can be taken, they seem to warp the aim of those about to attack. When precious information is on the eve of exchange, the knower suddenly loses their nerve, if not their mind. If this doesn't sound like a cabal of enchanters, perhaps your mind has been corrupted as well. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the lore of the monk, wizard, and enchanter. Remember, this is only part 1 of a 4-part series, so if you want to make sure you don't miss your favorite class's lore, be sure to subscribe and tap the bell to turn on notifications so you know when the next one goes up. We've also got a new weekly podcast called PantheonPlus Rewind that gets released every Sunday at noon Eastern here on YouTube, so you don't want to miss that as well. I'll leave some links in the description. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for watching.